Dear friends, today we're going to look at a concept that, if you truly understand it, will completely change the way you see the board. This concept is overprotection. And just a heads up, this lesson is a bit more advanced than usual. It's not the kind of idea you'll just use tomorrow without thinking. Here, you need to pause, observe, and really understand what you're thinking. In fact, let me tell you something. If you can, watch this lesson more than once. And if you have a chessboard at home, even better. Set up the pieces and go through the game with me. Because when you do it physically, touching the pieces and seeing it on your own board, everything makes more sense and sticks with you in a different way. And I say that from experience. Now, if you're a bit more of an enthusiast, if you're already starting to get even better at chess and you're past the stage of just moving the pieces around, if you want to start understanding a bit more, this lesson is for you. Here, we're starting to touch on ideas that grandmasters use, ideas that aren't obvious at first glance, all right? You'll see. These are ideas that decide games. Right now, I'm sure a lot of you are thinking, oh, Chesty Cheroy is getting a bit heavy. This class sounds really dense. Trust me, it's not. I promise you one thing, it's not going to be heavy at all. I'm going to put all my effort into making this lesson super entertaining. And on top of that, you'll be able to understand these complicated concepts in a really simple way. Let me introduce the game we're going to use to explain this concept. It's Nimzovich versus Rubinstein in 1911 in Carlsbad. It's a so-called well-known game, and we're going to understand it really well. In fact, Nimzovich was one of my favorite players. I've read several of his books and I love them. And we're going to see how Rubinstein, in this case, plays the French defense against him. E4, E6, D4, and D5, and here, as you know, there are quite a few options. The most well-known being E5, the advanced variation. Pawn takes pawn, the exchange variation, or either of these two moves, C3 or D2, using for example the classical variation with C3 or the Tarrasch variation with knight to D2. In this case, Nimzovich goes for the advanced move, E5. Alright, when we realize we're entering the advanced variation, we understand one thing. We're getting into a battle of pawn chains. Those of you who joined the most anticipated pack of the year a while ago, which I sent you, thank you. In the private lessons, in one of those classes, we talked about the pawn chain, right? And we understood that pawn chains are attacked at their base. In this case, the base is D4, and the other base, the black base, is E6. That's why black tries to quickly fight back with the C5 pawn. And in the future, who knows, if white wants, they could go after the E6 pawn, although that's not a priority. The game, logically, continues around the D4 square, with knight to C6 attacking it, and knight to F3 defending it. Here, you can already start to see which is the key point we need to overprotect. In this case, the key point we need to overprotect is the D4 square, and you'll see why. If this point falls and disappears, the E5 square will fall as well, and black will completely control the center, leaving the game to disaster. Whereas, if we're able to hold on to this point throughout the whole game, we're going to get a spectacular advantage from it, and enjoy a space advantage, as you can see, thanks to this pawn structure, especially the pawns on D4 and E5, which will make the game much easier for us. Honestly, this game is going to fascinate you. Queen to B6 keeps putting pressure on the D4 square, and now there's several possible moves here. One of the most popular moves is the one Nimzovich played, bishop to D3. Just so you know, especially for those of you who aren't professionals yet, taking this pawn is a mistake because after all the exchanges, okay, the bishop would come out to B5, given a check, and then the queen would be completely exposed and would be captured. You can check this for yourselves on your own board. The idea here is that there's only one possible move, which is pawn takes pawn. Bishop to D7, trying to avoid these kinds of tricks, is also a bad move, since it would allow us to go into the D takes C5 line, and when this bishop develops, we're going to castle, and for example, after a few moves, this bishop could end up trapped, so most likely the bishop would have to leave. Then we would play before anyway, and this knight wouldn't be able to go anywhere, making this an extremely comfortable position for us. That's why here, in this position, after bishop to D3, bishop to D7 is a mistake. The only correct move is to first exchange pawns on D4, relieving the tension. And now, yes, play bishop to D7, so that now we don't have the idea of capturing on C5 and gaining that tempo. You understand this? Good. You can watch it as many times as you need. And I know this lesson's a bit more advanced, but if you make good use of it, this lesson's worth money, believe me. Now they're attacking this d4 square again with two pawns. The most logical move is to retreat the bishop to e2. It might seem like we're losing time, but that's not the case, and I'll explain why. We're not losing a tempo because the center is completely closed, because we have a space advantage, and because we've entered a forced variation that's already been studied, where we know the bishop can retreat to e2, and black won't be able to figure out where to attack next. Now then, some very interesting moves are coming up, so pay attention. The knight comes to e7 with what idea? Well, with the idea jumping to 5, black has a clear plan to attack the d4 square and make it so we can't defend it. So we need to overprotect that super important square. Remember, if we lose this square, we lose the game. It's as simple as that. Let's do some. b3, a very clear idea. If they want to attack this square with knight to f5, well, we'll bring out our bishop to b2 and that solves all the problems. In fact, that's exactly what happened in the game. Knight to f5 and bishop to b2. That square is completely protected. Careful. Protected. Not super protected or overprotected. What does it mean to be super protected? For example, if 3 pieces are attacking us, then more than 3 should be defended. In this case, since 3 are defending, then here it wouldn't be super protected. Let me explain a metaphor that'll really help you understand these kinds of positions. Imagine, okay, that at home, someone always has to stay to take care of the cat, right? Okay, if just one person stays to take care of the cat and something unexpected comes up for them, what's the cat gonna do? We won't know what to do, so things will start to go wrong. If, for example, there are 3 people at home taking care of the cat and something unexpected comes up for any of the 3, they could leave. Why? Because there would still be someone left to look after the cat. Well, the same thing would happen, for example, with this pawn. I'm explaining these kinds of metaphors to you because I think it's easier for them to stick in our minds when they come up in games. Be careful with this. Look at what the black pieces do here. Bishop to b4. I recommend that all of you who want to study seriously pause the video for a moment and try to find what the best move is to stop this check. I'm going to say it right now. The only move that works, and it's actually a very good move, is king to f1. This move might surprise many of you, but it's actually very interesting. Remember one thing, since this square isn't overprotected, there's no good way to defend it. If we block the check with the knight, whether on c3 or d2, we'd be blocking the defense from the bishop or the queen and we'd lose it. And the same thing would happen with the bishop. For example, they could simply trade pieces and then capture on d4. Therefore, the only way to stop this check is by moving the king to f1, and this is a very typical idea. In the French defense, white simply places the king on f1 and has a really good plan to follow. We're just going to play g3 and then king to g2, and as you can see, the king has basically created an artificial castling and will be very safe here. And that bishop is probably going to end up a bit out of play once we drive it away with a 3. Alright? Very well. The idea is that now, after this king to f1, black plays a very interesting move, h5, with a double purpose. What's the first purpose? The first purpose is obviously to attack the king, and the second is to create an outpost for the knight on f5. What does an outpost mean? Well, this knight is in a spot where it can't be attacked by pawns, because the e-pawn is already advanced too far, and the g-pawn won't be able to move to g4, since we've created a wedge with h5, precisely protecting against the g4 advance. You get it, right? Very good. After this move, h5 by the black pieces, comes g3, our ideal plan to develop the king via g2. Black continues with rook to f8, taking control of the semi-open file, which has now become open since there are no pawns left, and since they're not threatening anything for now, Nilsevich sticks to his plan with king to g2. It's simple, right? It's true the king couldn't castle, but he made an artificial castle with king to f1 and king to g2. Since the center is completely closed, we don't mind losing a bit of time. This is extremely important and you should really remember it, okay? You'll see that in this lesson, you're going to learn a ton. That's why I say it's really important for those of you who have the time to watch it more than once. The idea is that if the center's closed, we can afford to lose several moves, whether it's with the bishop, the king, like we've seen, because what's important is to position our pieces well. You'll see that with some of them we'll run into problems, but we're going to try to find solutions. After this move, king to g2, the game continues with g6, shoring up the position a bit and giving this bishop a clear path to maneuver on the dark squares. Of course, this does make things a bit tougher for the light squared bishop since all the pawns are on white squares. So this bishop is gonna have a slightly harder time, as it'll run into its own pawn structure. After this g6, the white pieces play h3, a very useful move. Do you know what they're trying to do? They want to play g4 so that now they can drive the knight out of its advanced post. After playing g4, whether there's an exchange or not, the knight would have to retreat. We would have gained the advanced post, and on top of that, the bishop would be blocked and we'd be threatening to win it. For example, if here the knight were to retreat, a move like a3 would end up winning the bishop. You see it? Because the bishop would have no possible squares to retreat to. Therefore, g4 is a real threat. And here Rubinstein realizes this and pulls his bishop back to e7. Not only does he retreat the bishop, but now he also prevents this g4. Do you know why g4 would be a mistake now? Because every pawn move creates weaknesses. Always, always, always. Keep that firmly in mind. Every time someone moves a pawn, weaknesses are created. What weakness is created after playing g4? Well, the f5 square, the f4 square and the h4 square. In this case, you could continue with knight to h4, getting rid of one of the defenders of the d4 square, because we must not forget that the real strength we need to give to the d4 pawn is to super protect it. So after the check, they would exchange the knight, and if we trade, this bishop would enjoy fantastic health among the light squared pawns. That's why playing g4 here would not be a good idea. Queen to d2, very interesting. We need to develop the queen, and why not to d3? Doesn't it seem more active? Well, queen to d3 would be a very serious mistake, especially in this type of opening where the rook. The black rook is placed on the c-file and combines with the knight. For example, here, knight to b4 would force us to move the queen, and then a move like knight to c2, supported by the rook, would be taking out our own rook on a1, right? Therefore, here, the move queen to d3 wouldn't be possible because of the combination of knight to b4 and knight to c2, and that's why queen to d2 seems like a much better move. A 5, trying to destabilize white's queen side. Although, remember one thing, every pawn move creates a weakness. If this is the second time you're watching the video, you'll understand perfectly why I say this, and a 5 will end up being weak. Those of you watching the video for the first time will understand it in a little while, alright? And the idea is that now, after this a5 for the moment, it's true that we're not too worried about it, we have more important things to do, and here Nimzovich brings the rook. 2c1, look how interesting, he still hasn't developed a knight on b1, which is really the colt, or the piece that's going to be the hardest for us to develop because it doesn't have a possible development. If it comes out via 3, they're going to trade it off. Our bishop will be diverted from defending the d4 square, and we literally be losing the pawn, and with it, pretty much the game. If the knight tries to develop via c3, it would be blocking the bishop, just like if the queen moves and comes to d2, because then we'd also stop defending this bishop, the knight on b1. This is our Achilles heel in this position, but don't worry, we're going to look for a solution to that. So, rook to c1, what a beautiful maneuver. Even though we haven't castled, we bring our rook into the attack, facing off directly against the other rook that's also placed on the open file. Rook to c1, there it goes. How does the game continue? How do black respond after this rook to c1? With a very good move, bishop to f8. Whenever you see this kind of move, you should think, let's see, because they're pulling a bishop back to its original square. That can't be. Well, obviously, because there's a very strong thread. Bishop to h6, threatening our queen and rook, winning the exchange. Of course, we could move the queen away, but we wouldn't have time to save the rook. Therefore, here, Nimzowitsch, very wisely, plays queen to d1, retreating it to its original square. The queen is fine on its original square. Normally, we want to move it to connect the rooks, but since the rook has already crossed over and is placed to the left of the queen can retreat to d1 from where it controls the whole position. That controls the d4 square, that controls the advance of a4, so the queen on d1 is well placed. What a great move! Bishop to h6, they're threatening our rook, and we need to consider where that rook is going to go. Let's think move by move. Let's see, honestly, h2 doesn't appeal to me because they're coming in with the knight, they're threatening us here, and they're going to seize the initiative. I'm pretty sure I don't like c5 either. Let's put this back the way it was. I'm pretty sure I don't like c5 either because honestly, they just attack it again, we'd have to retreat, they'd attack it again, we'd come back here, and this would just be a draw by repetition. We don't want to draw. We have a good space advantage. So the move that comes to mind is the Nimzowitsch move, which is rook to c3, even though it might seem like a really strange move, right? But actually, it's a very good move. The rook on c3 is very well placed. It can't be easily driven away because this dark square bishop can never chase it off. The light squared one obviously can't either, and a knight would just waste a lot of time trying. The only one that could do it would be this one, after a 7 and b5, and we always have time either to exchange the bishop or to play a 4, solidly defending this b5 square. So here, this rook on c3 is very well placed. Who knows, maybe in the future we can double up the rooks or even set up the daring Alekine's gun with 2 rooks and the queen. Therefore, the rook on c3 is very, very well placed. Rook to c3 by Nijlitz, castling by Blast, and now that the bishop isn't on e7 defending the h4 square, g4 is a really good move. See the issue with g4 earlier? The knight could jump to h4. Now it can't, or it's lost. Therefore, the knight has to retreat backward. It doesn't matter if they exchange pawns or not. The position would be exactly the same. So here, knight from f to e7 is pretty much a forced move. The game continues with normal development. Let's think about something. How many pieces are defending this square? 1 and 2. Surely, many of you here, before making this d4 move, were wondering if this d4 pawn was hanging and could be captured. The truth is, no, because after the exchanges, the bishop is still defending by x-ray. We would have the move rook takes c8, and after the exchanges, then we would win the knight on d4. I suppose that here, some amateur or someone with a bit less experience might not have noticed that. But anyway, I'm clarifying it just in case any of you, when we played rook to c3, thought we could lose the d4 pawn. When you watch this video a second time, if you do, pay close attention to that point when we play rook to c3, that it's not possible to capture the d4 pawn. Very good. Now then, so I don't lose track, we need to develop the last piece we have left. And now we can, because this square is well defended. Which way would you do it? Through d2 or through a3? This is a good time, if you want, to pause the video and try to guess which is the better way to develop this knight. The truth is, developing it through d2 would be a bad move, because here it would be completely fanned off by the pawn. It wouldn't be able to move forward. If it tries to find routes over here, it would also be fanned off by this g6 pawn, and if it tries to go out through e6, it would also be well blocked. So here the correct solution, and it's a very typical maneuver when we need to overprotect the d4 square, is to play knight to a3 with the sole purpose of playing knight to c2, defending and over-defending this d4 square again. Why? So that we can move the other pieces freely, because there will be enough to defend this d4 square. Knight to a3, very good move. Very well, knight to b4. Now they're taking advantage of the fact that white no longer has a3 available, so knight to b4 is a good move, placing the knight on an advanced square. But without a doubt, here white can play knight to c2, and look at what they're doing. Trying to exchange a knight that wasn't doing anything, the knight from b1, for the knight that was on c6, one of the main attackers of the square, on d4. I call this a beneficial exchange. Our knight that wasn't doing anything in exchange for their best knight. You understand this, right? Here the game continues as follows. Black decides to exchange the rooks. Here there is no other move except bishop takes rook, obviously, just as now after knight takes knight. There is no other move except queen takes knight. Very good. At this point, after the exchanges, black plays rook to c8, trying to pin this bishop with the queen. And do you know where Nimzowitsch puts the queen? And this is a spectacular lesson. He puts it, or rather, he places it on b2. The idea of putting the queen on b2, even though it might seem very cramped or closed in, like it can't get out, is actually key. It's about protecting the d4 square. Telling its friends, the knight and the bishop, if you have other plans, you can go ahead. I'll stay here and defend this square. You get this? This is exactly what I was explaining to you at the very beginning of the video. So the queen on b2 is super well placed, and you'll see that it's going to have some good ideas. Black plays bishop to b5, and here's the moment where we need to think. They're offering us a bishop exchange. Should we trade or not? When we're offered a piece exchange, what should we be thinking about? Who does it benefit? In this case, I like to do an exercise and think, for example, Imagine that now we try to remove all the bishops from the position. Erase all four bishops from your mind. For those of you following the game on your physical board, okay, which I highly recommend by the way, remove the bishops, just take them off. So, who'd you rather be, white or black? Most would choose to be white. Why? Notice how black's pieces created weaknesses on b7 and a5 due to overextended pawns. After g takes h and g takes h, we create another weakness on h5, far more critical than the one on h3, with the king so far away. Therefore, here it actually benefits white to exchange bishops, and that's why Nimzovich trades these bishops. Not only that, but taking advantage of the strong overprotection he has on the d4 square, he can also go after the other bishop, bishop to e2, exchanging pieces to reach a superior endgame. Obviously, if they capture, that's great, our plan is working out perfectly. However, of course, Rubinstein was a very strong player and understood that here he had to defend his remaining bishop tooth and nail. He absolutely wanted to hold on to a position that wasn't so losing. The idea is that, even after this bishop to 8, white enjoys a tremendous position. Besides the space advantage granted by holding the d4 square, which also gives control over e5, this position is clearly advantageous. And it's easily attackable for white, as you'll see in just a moment. After this rook to c1, black quite sensibly exchanges on g4 before white can do so on h5, because otherwise, as you've seen, that pawn would end up very poorly placed. After these exchanges, h takes g4 and h takes g4, black plays rook to c6, obviously inviting white to capture so that the pawn structure can be fixed a little. Obviously, we're not going to fall for that mistake. Instead here, Ninzovich plays queen to 3. Once again, one of the super defenders goes out for a straw. Why? Because since this point is super defended, we can move out with whichever piece we want. A very interesting move. The a5 square is being threatened by two pieces, so you have to try to defend it, either with the rook, which would be a very bad move because the rook would end up very passive. Or, for example, by exchanging rooks, forcing one of the two attackers on a 5 to retreat. Or, as Nimzowitsch comments about this game, there was a very interesting move, which is, knight to f5, uncovering an attack on the queen. And here he probably mentioned that the best move for white is to give up the queen in exchange for the rook and the knight. And how would this continue? Rook takes c6, bishop takes queen, and g takes f5. So we've managed to win a rook and a knight in exchange for a queen. A game that would have been slightly favorable for white, but that's not what happened. I'm mentioning it because it's really, really interesting. You can check it yourselves on the board. The idea is that here black shows the most logical move, the one any of us would use, which is rook takes rook to divert one of the two attackers from the a5 square. It's definitely better to retreat the queen because that way we occupy the open file. It's always good to control the open files, right? And we're also doing something else, forming a battery with the bishop and queen to try to break through on h6 at some point, since the castling pawns are on white squares, which means the dark squares have become much weaker. Alright, after these queen exchanges on c1, you might say there's still a lot of game left, but how would you feel if I told you that here, black could practically resign already? Surely many of you are wondering why, since this position actually looks pretty even. Same material, same pieces. I don't see any overwhelming advantage either. Alright, the idea here is that I understand many of you might not be familiar with these kinds of endgame concepts because they're a bit more advanced, but let's suppose something. In any case, we can attack these pawns again, right? For example, with queen to a3, and we would win the a5 pawn. The only way to defend it would be with the move b6. You see, if they don't do it and lose one of these two pawns, this 2 versus 1, and on top of that, with no rooks on the board, it would mean creating a passed pawn for black, forcing them to block it, and they'd have to give up one of their minor pieces. And obviously, giving up one of their minor pieces is not a pleasant deal. At that point, I think we would all understand that they might as well resign. So here, at some point, they're forced to play b6. And the fact that they have to focus on the queen side gives us an opportunity to attack the king side really hard. we can see it's not well defended, and a move like, for example, bishop to g5, threatening at some point to completely eliminate this knight, say bringing the queen in, where white can't counterattack with anything, would already be completely lethal. And many of you might say, come on, Chastire, but the knight just moves away and that's it. I mean, to win this knight, you need two moves. First, bringing the queen, and then capturing it, right? The knight just moves away, and that's it. It can't move to c8, or it's lost. Its only other square is c6, which looks good, putting pressure on d4. But this move actually loses the knight, because we just need to attack its defender, which is the queen, and when the queen moves away, we would capture the knight. So as you can see, we're attacking the knight, but the knight needs to defend itself before it gets lost. For example, queen to e8, and this wraps up quickly. For instance, with bishop to f6, threatening at some point to bring the queen in, either here or here, winning the game immediately. No matter how much they try to trade bishops, we're not worried about them capturing us, because then we would take with a pawn and checkmate would be inevitable. So, for example, we have time to bring in the knight. No matter how much they try to defend, let's say, just make something up. With the bishop over here to stop the queen from coming in, we could continue with queen to h1, attacking the bishop, and when the bishop moves away, we would come in to deliver checkmate. And if, for example, they try to defend with their own queen, we can still play queen to h1, threatening checkmate on h7, which is completely unstoppable. That's why I say that this position, which might have seemed completely equal at first glance, is actually clearly advantageous for the white pieces. I'm aware that this lesson isn't easy. You should watch it more than once. All of you who have the time, I highly recommend it. I hope you really enjoyed it. You already know that if you also want to train with boards and pieces like the ones I use, I got you a 15% discount at the store I shop at. I spoke with the supplier, and sure enough, they gave all of us a 15% discount on the entire store. You have no idea what that means, because these kinds of professional chess stores already operate on a very slim margin, and being able to get all the equipment at a 15% discount is really something to take advantage of. So I strongly recommend that if you want to upgrade your chess set, get a new one, or really train with a chess set that's worth it, one that actually makes you want to sit down and play. It truly makes all the difference. It changes your whole perspective on chess, right? So I highly recommend it to all of you who are interested, okay? Of course, if you're not interested, then don't. All you have to do is go to the store I've linked in the description, chesses.art, and use the discount code CHESSTEACHER with any purchase. Want some pieces? Alright then, get some pieces. Want a board? Alright then, get a board, whichever one you like best. Want pieces and a board? Well, they also have super complete sets, which are the ones I use on the channel that show up, and they're a great deal with the discount. Keep in mind, these are professional chess sets, so of course they're not cheap. But the great thing about this store, and it's my favorite for a reason, is that they let you pay in installments, and you can do it without any interest. So if you want, you can check it out. I'll leave the link down below in the description, or you can look it up yourself, chesses.art, and use the discount code CHES TEACHER. Plus, whatever you order will arrive at your home in 24 or 48 hours. Don't tell me that's not amazing. I hope you loved this lesson. Just like explaining it really moved me, talking about these slightly deeper topics. If you liked them, let me know in the comments. Leave a big like, and I'll bring more lessons like this. And we'll see each other tomorrow, as always, for those of you who are subscribers to the channel, in the next video. Bye.